Bookbinder's Apprentice. The advertisement appeared in the newspaper on a Tuesday, nestled between notices for estate sales and piano lessons. Bookbinder seeks apprentice. No experience necessary. Must love stories more than success. Inquire at Fortuna's Bindery, Maple Street. Julia Chen read it 3 times over her morning coffee, which had gone cold while she stared at the classified section. She was 51 years old, recently retired from a 30-year career in corporate law, and had been filling her days with yoga classes and book clubs and volunteer work that left her feeling more empty than fulfilled. She had done everything right, worked hard, saved responsibly, planned for retirement, and now found herself with decades of life ahead and no idea how to live them. The Bookbinder's ad felt like a message written specifically for her, though she couldn't say why. She hadn't thought about bookbinding since she was a child, watching her grandmother repair old volumes in her kitchen, the smell of glue and leather mixing with the scent of jasmine tea. Julia folded the newspaper, put on her coat, and went to find Maple Street. The bindery occupied a narrow storefront that seemed to exist in a fold of time the modern city had forgotten. The buildings on either side were glass and steel, but Fortuna's was all dark wood and curved glass, with gold lettering on the window that had been applied by hand, probably decades ago. Inside, the shop was a cathedral of books. They lined every wall, stacked on every surface, filled the air with the particular perfume of old paper and aged leather. Some were clearly waiting for repair, their spines cracked, their pages loose. Others gleamed with fresh binding, their covers embossed with gold or silver. A few lay open on work tables, their internal structures exposed like the anatomy of some beautiful machine. "You're here about the position," said a voice from somewhere deep in the shop. A woman emerged from behind a particularly tall stack of volumes. She was perhaps 70, small and compact, with silver hair cut short and hands that moved with the precision of a surgeon. She wore an apron covered in smudges of glue and ink, and her dark eyes took in Julia with a single comprehensive glance. "I'm Fortuna Reeves," she said, not offering her hand. Her fingers were covered in glue. "And you are?" "Julia Chen. I saw your ad. I'm not sure why I'm here, to be honest. I don't know anything about bookbinding." "I said no experience necessary. What I need to know is, do you love stories more than success?" Julia thought about his career, about winning cases she didn't believe in, about the partnerships and bonuses that felt hollow even as she collected them. "I used to," she said slowly. "I used to love reading. I used to disappear into books for hours. But somewhere along the way, I stopped. I can't even remember the last book I read that wasn't for book club or because someone said I should." Fortuna nodded, as if this was the exact right answer. "When did you stop?" "Law school, I think. Reading became work. Stories became cases. Everything became about extraction, pulling out what was useful, discarding the rest. I forgot how to just be in a story." "Can you be here tomorrow at 8? Fortuna asked. Yes, but don't you want to know about my qualifications, my resume?" "I know everything I need to know. You're here because you need to be here, and the shop has a way of calling the people who need it." Fortuna turned back to her workbench, then paused. "Wear old clothes. The work is messy." Julia Julia arrived at 7:45 the next morning, nervous in a way she hadn't been since her first day of law school. Fortuna was already at work, her hands moving over a damaged book with the same concentrated attention a pianist might give to a difficult piece. "Coffee's in the back," Fortuna said without looking up. "Then come watch." Julia poured herself a cup from an ancient percolator and returned to find Fortuna carefully removing the damaged spine from a leather-bound volume. The book was old, 18th century, Julia guessed from the style, and had clearly been loved hard. Its pages were soft with handling, its margins filled with faded handwriting. "What is it?" Julia asked. "A journal, someone's daily records from 1762 to 1765. 3 years of a life, births, deaths, weather, meals, arguments, reconciliations." Fortuna worked as she spoke, her movements economical and sure. "The family wants it preserved. They've never read it. It's in an old form of Dutch, but they know it matters." "Why, if they can't read it?" Fortuna looked up, and her dark eyes held something that might have been amusement. "Because it's proof. Proof that someone lived, that they paid attention, that they thought their days were worth recording. Because 300 years later, their great-great-great-grandchildren are standing in a bindery in a city that didn't exist when these words were written, trying to make sure those days aren't lost." She returned to her work, carefully separating the text block from its binding. "That's what we do here. We preserve stories, not just the words on the page, but the physical objects that carry them. Every book we repair has a history. Who read it, who loved it, who carried it with them, who passed it on. Our job is to make sure that history can continue." Julia watched, fascinated, as Fortuna worked. There was something meditative about the process, the careful attention required, the respect for the object itself. "Today you'll learn to make paper," Fortuna said. "It's the foundation of everything. Before you can repair books, you need to understand what they're made of." Making paper, it turned out, was both simpler and more complex than Julia had imagined. Fortuna showed her how to tear rags into small pieces, how to beat them into pulp, how to use a screen and decal to form sheets, how to press and dry them until they became something that could hold words. "Paper is about transformation," Fortuna explained as they worked. "Rags that are worn out, that can't serve their original purpose anymore, become something new, something that will last centuries if treated right, something that can carry ideas and stories and dreams." Julia's hands were sore by lunch, and her back ached from bending over the vat of pulp. But there was something deeply satisfying about the work, about the tangible result of her efforts. She had made something. Her hands had transformed raw materials into objects that could serve a purpose. They ate lunch in the back room, surrounded by supplies: leather hides, spools of thread, bottles of glue, sheets of marbled paper in 100 colors. "Tell me about your grandmother," Fortuna said, biting into a sandwich, "the one who repaired books." Julia was startled. "How did you know about her?" "You have the hands, and you watch the work the way someone who's seen it before watches it, with recognition, not just curiosity." Julia set down her own sandwich, surprised to find her eyes stinging. She was my father's mother, came from Taiwan in the 50s. She couldn't afford new books, so she'd buy damaged ones at sales and repair them. She tried to teach me, but I was too impatient. Always wanted to rush to the next step, to be finished. And now I wish I'd paid attention. She died when I was in college. I was too busy studying for exams to make it home before the end. Fortuna was quiet for a moment. The work teaches patience. You can't rush it. If you try, you ruin the book. The only way forward is to slow down, to give each step the time it needs. It's a lesson in presence. Everyone keeps telling me to be present, Julia said, surprising herself with the bitterness in her voice. My therapist, my yoga teacher, every self-help book I've bought, but I don't know how. I spent 30 years training myself to be 3 steps ahead, to anticipate every problem, to never be caught off guard. I don't know how to just be here. Then you're in the right place, Fortuna said simply, because this work demands it. You cannot be anywhere else when you're binding a book. The work won't allow it. The days fell into a rhythm. Julia arrived early and stayed late, learning the vocabulary of the craft, signatures and gatherings, kettle stitching and French double core, quarter binding and full binding, marbled end papers and gold tooling. Her hands learned the feel of good leather, the tension of properly sewn signatures, the patience required to let glue dry completely before moving to the next step. Fortuna taught her not just the techniques, but the philosophy behind them. We're not making these books immortal, she explained one afternoon as they worked together on a particularly damaged volume. Nothing is immortal. We're giving them more time. We're saying, this is worth preserving. This matters enough to invest hours of skilled labor in its survival. How do you decide what matters? Julia asked. Everything matters to someone. This book. Fortuna gestured at the battered novel they were repairing, a cheap paperback from the 1960s. Most people would say just buy a new copy. It's been reprinted dozens of times. But this copy has someone's name in it, has notes in the margins, has a bus ticket from 1967 tucked between pages 83 and 84. This copy is irreplaceable, even if the words inside it are not. Julia thought about this as she carefully lifted the text block from its damaged cover. How many things had she treated as replaceable that weren't? How many relationships had she let drift away, thinking she could always reconnect later? How many moments had she rushed through, thinking there would always be more? I think I've spent my whole life treating everything as replaceable, she said quietly, including myself. Fortuna looked up from her work, her expression gentle. And now I'm learning that maybe nothing is. 3 months into her apprenticeship, Fortuna announced that Julia was ready to work on a real commission. A client brought in her mother's cookbook, Fortuna explained, showing Julia the damaged volume. It's handwritten, recipes collected over 50 years. The spine is completely gone. Half the pages are loose. There are stains and tears throughout. She wants it restored so she can pass it to her daughter. Julia felt a flutter of panic. I'm not ready for something this important. You're ready, and I'll be here if you need help. But you need to do this, Julia. You need to trust yourself. took weeks. Julia moved slowly, carefully, treating each page as if it were made of butterfly wings. She cleaned the stains using techniques Fortuna had taught her, repaired the tears with Japanese tissue and wheat paste, re-sewed the signatures, created a new spine, reattached the covers. But more than the technical work, she read the recipes. She couldn't help it. As she handled each page, she found herself absorbing the notes written in the margins. Tom's favorite, make for Christmas, add more salt next time. Made this the day Sarah was born. Each recipe was a story. Each ingredient list was a moment in someone's life. And as Julia worked, she found herself thinking about her own mother, about the dishes she'd made, about the kitchen that had been the center of their home. When had she last cooked something just because she wanted to? When had she last made something with her hands that wasn't for a purpose or a deadline, but simply for the joy of making it? When the cookbook was finished, Julia held it for a long moment before boxing it for the client. She had made this. She had taken something broken and made it whole again. Not perfect. The stains were still faintly visible, the repairs evident if you knew where to look, but whole, serviceable, ready to be used and loved for another generation. The client cried when she saw it. "It's perfect," she said, cradling the book like a child. "I can't believe you were able to save it." After she left, Fortuna put a hand on Julia's shoulder. "Well done. You have the touch. More importantly, you have the heart." Julia felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked tight for years. "Thank you," she whispered, "for teaching me, for being patient with me. I told you, the shop calls the people who need it. You were always meant to be here." The seasons changed. Summer heat gave way to autumn cool, then to winter's sharp clarity. Julia's hands grew strong and sure. She learned to read a book's structure at a glance, to diagnose its injuries, to prescribe the right treatment. She learned which adhesives worked best for which materials, how to match leather and thread, how to create marbled paper in patterns that seemed to hold entire universes. But more than the technical skills, she learned to slow down, to be present, to give each book the time and attention it required, to see each one not as a task to be completed, but as a story to be honored. She started reading again, too, not for book club, not because she should, but because she wanted to. She'd take a damaged book home after repairing it, read it to understand what she'd saved, what she'd passed forward. She discovered authors she'd never heard of, stories that moved her, words that stayed with her long after the book was closed. One evening, working late on a particularly complex repair, Fortuna asked her, "Are you happy, Julia?" The question caught Julia off guard. She paused, needle in hand, thread trailing from the signature she was sewing. Was she happy? She thought about her old life, the office, the cases, the constant pressure, the feeling of running without ever arriving anywhere. She thought about her current life, the quiet shop, the patient work, the satisfaction of making something whole. "Yes," she said, surprised by how much she meant it. "I think I am. Or at least, I'm becoming happy. Learning how." Fortuna smiled. "Good. That's the real work, you know. Not the books. The books are just teachers. They show us that broken things can be mended, said, exactly like that. In the spring, a year after she'd first walked into the bindery, Fortuna made an announcement. "I'm getting old," she said one morning over coffee. "My hands aren't as steady as they used to be. My eyes tire more quickly, and I've been thinking about what comes next." Julia felt her stomach drop. "You're not closing the shop." "No, I'm offering it to you, not as a gift. You'll need to buy it, though I'll make the terms reasonable, but as a continuation. This shop has existed for 80 years. My grandmother started it, passed it to my mother, who passed it to me. I have no children. I'd like to pass it to you." Julia stared at her, unable to speak. "You don't have to decide now," Fortuna continued. "Think about it. Talk to your family, your friends. Consider what it would mean, running a small business, doing this work full-time, committing to it." "I don't need to think about it," Julia heard herself say. "Yes, absolutely yes." Fortuna raised an eyebrow. "That was fast. Are you sure? This isn't a hobby or a retirement project. It's a responsibility. These books, these stories, people trust us with them. It's not glamorous. It's not particularly profitable. It's just work that matters." "I'm sure," Julia said. "For the first time in my life, I'm absolutely sure." The transition took months. There were papers to sign, loans to arrange, techniques to master, clients to meet. Fortuna stayed on, teaching Julia the business side of things, how to estimate repair costs, how to communicate with clients, how to source materials, how to manage time and workflow. But gradually, Fortuna stepped back, coming in only a few days a week, then a few days a month, and Julia found herself alone in the shop, responsible for its survival, entrusted with its stories. She changed very little. The name stayed the same, Fortuna's Bindery. The methods stayed the same. The commitment to quality over speed, to craft over profit, to honoring each book's unique history, all of that remained. But she added one thing. In the back room, she set up a small teaching space. Once a month, she offered a free workshop, teaching anyone who wanted to learn the basics of book repair. She taught teenagers how to fix their damaged paperbacks, taught elderly people how to preserve their family Bibles, taught anyone who walked through the door that broken things could be mended, that patience was a skill, that stories mattered. Some of her students were just curious, but some, she could always tell, were like her, lost, searching, trying to figure out how to fill the years ahead with something that mattered. To them, she told her own story, how she'd spent 30 years doing work that left her empty, how she'd found this shop at exactly the right moment, how she'd learned that it was never too late to start again. 5 years after Julia first walked into Fortuna's Bindery, she received a package. Inside was a book, a journal actually, handmade and beautifully bound. The pages were blank except for the first one, which held a note in Fortuna's elegant handwriting. "Dear Julia, I'm writing this from my daughter's house in Vermont, where I finally agreed to stay permanently. My hands shake too much now for the delicate work, and my eyes are failing. It's time to rest, but I wanted you to have this. I made it years ago, thinking I might use it for my own memoirs or reflections, but I realize now it was never meant for me. It was meant for you. Fill it with your own stories, not the stories you repair, but your own. The story of how you found yourself at 51, The story of what you're learning. The story of becoming. Because that's what we're all doing, really. Becoming. The work never ends. We're never finished. We're just continuously repairing ourselves, mending the broken places, preserving what matters, letting go of what doesn't. You are an excellent apprentice, and you're an even better bookbinder. But more than that, you're a good human being, and that's the real skill. With love and respect, Fortuna. Julia sat in the quiet shop, holding the journal, and cried, not from sadness, but from gratitude, for this work, for this place, for Fortuna's wisdom, for second chances, for the knowledge that transformation was always possible, that rags could become paper, that paper could become books, that books could become teachers, and that people, even people who thought they were finished growing, could become something new. She opened the journal and picked up a pen. And then, for the first time in decades, she began to write her own story. The shop continues. On Maple Street, in that fold of time the modern city forgot, between the glass and steel towers, people come with their damaged books, their family Bibles, their children's first readers, their grandmother's cookbooks, their grandfather's journals. They come with stories they want to preserve, memories they can't bear to lose. And Julia receives them all with gentle hands and patient attention. She listens to their stories. She assesses the damage. She explains what can be saved and what can't. And then, with needle and thread, with glue and leather, with time and care, she mends what's broken. She works slowly. Some days, only one book crosses her workbench. But that one book gets everything she has, all her skill, all her attention, all her respect, because every book matters to someone. Every story deserves to be preserved. Every broken thing deserves the chance to be whole again. In the evenings, she locks the shop and walks home through streets that are always changing, always new. She passes restaurants and shops, theaters and galleries, all the busy life of a city that never sleeps, and she feels grateful to be part of it, grateful to have found her place in the great story of the world. Sometimes, late at night, she writes in Fortuna's journal. She writes about the books she's repaired, but also about her own repairs, about learning to slow down, about discovering that success and satisfaction are not the same thing, about understanding finally that a life well lived is not measured by accomplishments, but by attention, by the quality of presence we bring to our moments, by the care we take with the stories entrusted to us, by the patience we show the broken things, including ourselves. And sometimes, very late, when the city has finally quieted and the only sound is her pen scratching across paper, she thinks about her grandmother, about sitting at her kitchen table, watching her repair books, breathing in the smell of glue and leather and jasmine tea, about being too impatient to learn, too busy to pay attention. But she's learning now. Better late than never. Better at 56 than not at all. The work teaches patience. The books teach presence. And life teaches that we can always begin again, that transformation is always possible, that the story isn't over until the last page is turned. Julia's story continues, page by page, stitch by stitch, one careful, patient, present moment at a time. For everyone who has ever felt it was too late to start again. For everyone learning to slow down. For everyone discovering that the best chapters sometimes come in the second half of the book. For everyone mending broken things, including themselves. May we all find our binderies. May we all learn patience. And may we all remember that we are never too old to transform, never too broken to mend, never too lost to find our way home to the work that makes us whole.